This is Gemara Moed Katan Daf Ches. All the learning should be a tremendous chos for Hashem of Shur Yosef and Yefredim and Rebbeinu Chaim Rasar Shalom Zibun Reizah Zervas Knendel Ita Vasim Vas Choyisay Yisom Mendel Lezver Shalei Yishom Zamavi Vashav Figur Shulchan Shmol Dantil Din Lochan Reizah Mechai Vasmina Adin Ena Vashem Mendel Ziv Heg Rer Vivko Az Hashem Natal Tzvim Chales Amr Miyakot Tzara Baskila Shalom Yisachim and Yisrael Yehudas Milchmor Achai Ben Yitz your Fall Avram Ben Yorchel Adai Hashem Ben Chana Vigal Perel Bas Esther Miriam Gabriela Bas Lumi Yisrael Yitzchak Ben Dina V'Soy Shar Chadi Yisrael as well as Chashilach V'Shal Chaim Devar Shemirim Bas Yisrael Gittel Shandel Esther Bas Shana Mokal Mordechai Ben Davshendel Esther Gitzel Bas Shandel Shlomo Ben Levi Zahava Ofik Ben Teli Yeshema Ben Chaya Rachel Bas Adina. They should find us Viva Hagoin Bekaro. Even finally should be a tremendous Chosi Ilin Neshama for Michal Mordechai Ben Yitzchak HaKayin. We're really holding at the top of Daf Ches. If you're looking in front of you on at your computer or your phone or wherever you're looking, is you'll see the Daf of Daf Zayin Amud Beis. Because just to bring yourself back into the Sugya, we had a Machlekes Rebbe and Rebbe Yehuda as to we know that where do we know that B'Koyin Talia Milsa, that with regard to Tzaras, it's up to the mouth of the Koyin. If the Koyin says Tamei, Tamei, Tar, nothing, then it's nothing. You remain your status quo, whatever you are. It's not like other entities in which it's a Mitzias. Is it or is it not? We know by Marais of Anida. If it's red, it's red. If it's not red, it's not red. It's irrelevant if there are paskins. That's how you know. That's how it's revealed the halacha. But it's not that if the Rav says nothing, you're mutter. It's not the way it works. But by a Koyin, by Tzaras, the special din that it's up to the mouth of the Koyin. And where do we know that from? So the bottom of Zayin Amud Beis, we had two shitas yesterday, Rebbe and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda learned it out from a basik, that there are days that you look and the days you don't look. On a Chalamayid, on Sheva Brachas, a Chasana, you don't look. Why do you not look? Because you do not want to have to paskin potentially that the person is Tamei. Rebbe said no, you don't need a special pasuk. Why not? Because we learn it out from a different din. We know there's a din Mitziva Kayin that what? The Kayin tells a person if there's saras in his house, the Kayin says before I paskin on your house, which potentially is going to make you destroy your house, get rid of all the items from inside your house. Why are you getting rid of the items? Because if I paskin it has to be destroyed, everything has to be destroyed together. So I'm telling you to get rid of the items. So we see that it's up to the Kayin. He can wait until he gives that psak. That's the opinion of Rebbe. Rebbe Yud learns out from the pasuk. Rebbe learns it out from the fact that the Torah is chasam amani shel Yisrael, on the fact that we learn out from a dvar mitzvah. So now in the top of Chesam and Aleph, 2 lines from the top, we're up to understanding the opinion of Rebbe. Says Rebbe Omer Itzrich, why do we need both limudim? If we just had the pasuk of Rabbi Yehuda, hava amina l'dvar mitzvah and l'dvar sheslai, I would have thought, which I'm sure is very sensible, many people are thinking, for a mitzvah, for a chasan, for a shavar brachos, for a chalamayid, for a yomtiv, I understand it will be mekel. However, therefore, but what about for dvar shows for monetary matters? I would have thought not. So because Rachman of Tziva HaKoyin, because Rachman of Tziva HaKoyin have a mina honey in the lav tuma digufei, I would have thought it's not on the person's body. Maybe there's some sort of difference between tzaras in my body, tzaras in my house, and maybe that's where the element of leniency came from. Aval tuma digufei imamachsi chazile, you would have to look at it. Sricha therefore says the Gemara. That's why according to Rebbe you need both psukim. Says the Gemara, Amar Mar, about 7 lines down. Piggybacking off of the din of Rav Yehuda, Yeshem Shataraya Bo, Yeshem Shiataraya Bo. My Mashma asks the Gemara, where do we see in the pasuk that there are days you look, the days you do not look? Amar Abaya, in Kain Lichter Rachmana B'Yoim, my Ubayim, Shema Mina for an extra vav, one little line. Yeshem Shataraya Boy, Yeshem Shiataraya Boy, says Abayi from Ubayim teaches me there are days that you don't necessarily look. Rav Amar, Kula Kra Yiseru, the entire pasuk Ubayim Herais Boy is extraneous, is extra. Why? Says Rava the Imkain Lichtrachmana Ubay Hara Ois. And when you show it to the Kain, what's Ubayim Heira Ois? Put a contraction, one word, Ubay Hara Ois. So the extra word Ubayim is unnecessary. My Ubayim. So again, Abaye said extra vav, and Rava said the whole word is extra. And now, of course, the Gemara asks, what does Abaye do with Rava's drasha? With the whole word is extra. Different drasha. You're only allowed to look at a nega by yom and not by night. For Rava, where does Rava know that from? Because he uses the word of Ubayayim to teach me this din about that some days you look and some days you do not. For the fact that Bas says Einei HaKoyin, which shows that it has to be during the day when the Koyin can see with his own eyes. Says the Gemara, not sure why are highlighting just during funny colors. Okay, says the Gemara, Va'Abaya, what does Abaya do? Ahomi Baya, where does Abaya know this then? That it has to only be looked at during, what does Abaya do with the pasuk of Lakol Mara Einei HaKoyin Lemute Suma B'Achas Beinav, that if Koyin is blind to one eye, it's not called seen by his eyes. Mara Einei HaKoyin. So Abaya says that Koyin cannot paskin on Negayim. Ve'Rava Nami Mibaya Lahachi Einach Nami, says the Gemara, it's true, Rava needs the pasuk for that, and Rava needs the pasuk of Einei HaKoyin to tell me if a Koyin is blind to one eye, he cannot paskin. So we're back to the question according to Rava, where does Rava know that? For the fact that it says, and the nega that was shown li to me, and from there it says Rava li, that I have to see it myself without any filters, any light, straight up during the day. What does he do this last pasuk? You go paskin based on the light. Nami Kamash Mulan, says Abaye, and that's the proverbial ping pong game in the Gemara between Rava and Abaya. Exactly the limudim that we know that there are some days that you do not look in the Goyim. We know you can only look by day. We know it has to be seen by the eyes of the Kohen. We know the Kohen is a blind in one eye, it does not work. We have the extra Vav. We have the extra word Bayayim. We have the Kol Mare Einei HaKoyin. And for finally, we have Mechanega Nira Li Babayis. We continue with the Mishnah on Chesam and Aleph, Void Amar Rameir continues, says Rameir, another din about Cholamoid. Melakid Odam Atzamois Aviv Imam Nisha Simchi Lo, you're allowed to gather the bones of a father and mother. You had to do a reinterment on Chol HaMoed. Why? When you dealing with the bones of a deceased relative, it brings you to pain. Says the Rameir, because you have a simcha. What's the simcha that you have? So Rashi points out the simcha is that now you get to bury the body in the Kivrei Avos. You get to bury the body near his ancestors, and there's a level of simcha to that. Rav Yosi Omer, Avel Ulai, no, you're not allowed to do it. Why? Because it makes you at some level of avilus, it's a mourning. And the Mishnah concludes, a person is not allowed to inspire, awaken about a dead, and he can't give a spedim 30 days before Yontif. So first we're going to deal with the first part of the Mishnah, the din of gathering together the bones. This actually was a relevant shayla. Recently, there were people that Rahman al-Islam had to be buried to Corona, they couldn't be going where they wanted to go, and the shayla was, are we allowed to now do likat atzamais? Are we allowed to now pick up the bones? Are we allowed to bring it to Eretz Yisrael, for example? And that is, and the halacha is that the day that you do that, there's some level of avelus on that day, and that's the machlekes in Rami and Rav Yosi. But there's also an element of simcha, there's an element of joy. Says the Gemara of Raminu, I'm going to ask you a contradiction. Says the Brisa says that when you gather together the bones that day, like we just pointed out, has the din of avelus. But not at night. Rav Chisda explained this Brisa, even if the bones are wrapped up, still there's an element of avelus, as Rashi points out, and therefore you're not gathering them and you don't actually see them. Still there's an element of avelus. Why? Because you're reburying them. As long as the bones are not buried, there is an element of avelus. So why in the Mishnah did Ramir say misimcha ulai? You'll have to do it because it causes you joy. We see clearly in a Brisa not that way. Amar Abaye, Imam Simchas Haregel Alav. Say, what did Rameir mean? Of course, the act of reinterment, the act of gathering the bones, the act of performing a kvura on a relative, of course, brings pain, of course, brings avelus. So what did Rameir mean you're allowed to do it? You know why? Because there's the overwhelming joy. So says Rashi 7 lines to the bottom, Kalaimar, we know Kalaimar always means, Rashi saying not the literal words. You're so busy with Yontif and Cholamayid and the overwhelming feel of joy of Yontif. That's the reason why Meir says it's mutter. What does point out parenthetically for one moment, Taisus is kasha. The Gemara asked on a brisa, and the Gemara asked on Rameir from a brisa. Taisus points out, why couldn't the Gemara have just said, what's the problem? That brisa holds like Rav Yaisi. Interesting point. Taisus 4 lines from the bottom. And we continue in the Gemara of Le'ar al Mesai. The end of the Mishnah said that you're not allowed to be ma'arer, inspire words, give lamentations, speed him for a relative on Chol HaMoed. Ask the Gemara, what does that mean? Al Mesai, Amar Rav. Says Rav, you know what it means? It's when the person who gave that speedim would travel, he would travel around the Marava, around Eretz Yisrael, and Amri, and he would say, Yiv koin ame, cry my nation, kol Maria liba, all who are broken hearted, and he would make people cry. That you're not allowed to do. Why? You're not allowed to bring out feelings of sahar on Chol HaMoed. You're also not allowed to do it for 30 days before Yom Tif. Asks the Gemara, what's this din of 30 days? Amar Rav Kahana, Amar Rav Yudah, Amar Rav. I'll tell you why from a story. 4 lines to the bottom of the Amid Maisa Bad Demech. There was a story with a person. Shekines Mois Al's Regal. He together his money. And he was waiting to be Oile Regel, to go up to the Beis HaMikdash, go up to Yerushalayim. And you know what happened as he's waiting to leave? The Saftan, the person that gives the eulogies that Speidim came, and he stood by the entrance to the house, and he started saying his Speidim, and he made him very sad about the person's relative that was Niftar. And what did this person do? And his wife took the money, and gave it to the Saftan. They used to pay this eulogist. They would pay the person that gave this as Speidim, and she gave that money to them. And then, and therefore they did not go to be Oile Regel. So after that story, Amru, they said, you're not like on the regular you're not to give a speidim for within 30 days, because within 30 days, that's when you're within the time of the Yontif preparations, and we're nervous they're going to use the money, not for Yontif, but rather on the speidim, rather on the tsar, and therefore that's the reason why 30 days you're not allowed to. Teretz number 1 of Rav Kahana, Amar Rav Yudah, Amar Rav. Ushmuel Amar, says Shmuel, as we turn over to Chesam and Beis, you know why? It's 30 days, the person's in one's heart. Therefore, within 30 days, what's going to happen if you give a speidim? You're going to be thinking about it on Yontif, and you're going to come to Sar on Yontif, and that's the reason why it's not allowed. What is the difference between these two answers? If the Saftan, if the person that gives eulogies doesn't take wages, then the first concern doesn't apply. The first concern was a monetary concern. You're going to take your money, instead of using it for Yontif, you're going to use it for the Aspeidim. But if the person doesn't take money, there's not that concern. The second concern that we see over here, the concern that ain't a meis mishach min aleiv, that certainly applies, even if it's for free, because you're going to go into Yontif. Sad. Now we continue with more practices that you're doing on Chol HaMoed. Chesam and Beis. In Chayfrin Kuchen and Kvaris b'Moed, you're not allowed to bury. We'll see what difference in a koichen and a kever is on Chol HaMoed. A machanchen is like kuchen b'Moed, but you're allowed to prepare it on Chol HaMoed. Excuse me. Ve'oisin Nivreches b'Moed, and you're allowed to make a Nivreches, as we'll see in the Gemara, as a pan to do laundry. We'll see what type of laundry on Chol HaMoed. And we're allowed to create the aron, the coffin for the mace when the mace is in the courtyard. Unless you already have the wood, you're not allowed to gather the wood. So says the Gemara, my koichen and my kvaros. What was the first din of the Mishnah? That you're not allowed to dig koichen and kvaros, two different things. What are these things? Amar Rav Yudah, koichen is Chafira, ukvarais is a bibinyan. Koichen are when you dig into the wall, and kavarais are when you build the building on top of it. Two different types. Again, the kever is the above ground, and the koichen is when you're digging the niches into either the ground or into the walls, like they used to bury. They still do that here in some of the harzis, menuchais. You bury into the wall. They would bore a hole into the wall and put the body in that way. That's kuchen, and kever is to build the tomb on top of the grave. Tananami hachi, and kuchen, and kvar is kuchen bechafira, ukvar is bebinin, as we just said, that a kever is bebinin when you're building it on top. Avo, what did the Mishnah say? You're you're yes allowed to do in Chol Hamoed. Mechanchen is like kuchen. You're allowed to be mechanech. You're allowed to train it, adapt it. What does that mean? Keta mechanchen amar Rav Yehuda shemaya aruch mekatzray asidatana marich boy marich boy. If it's already dog, you're allowed to make it a little wider. You're allowed to make it a little narrower. You're allowed to make it a little longer in order to fit the mace, and that is allowed. You're not allowed to dig it fresh, but you're allowed to do some adjustments on it in Chol Hamoed. Vayse nevreches, you're allowed to make this pool, a pond to wash something. My nevreches amar Rav Yehuda zu bekia. This is a bekia, which again is something in which you do laundry in it. The price is both. So obviously nevreches is not the bekia. Explains Abaya v'yitema Rav Kana or v'yitema Rav Kana geha ubar geha just means a small one and a large one, a primary one and a secondary one, two parts that they used to do laundry in two different parts of the pond. The Mishnah concluded that when you have the mace in your chatz, you're allowed to create the aroin. We have a raya. You're allowed to do all the needs of a mace. You're allowed to cut off his hair, Saira his hair, Mechabsin like Susai, and you're allowed to do laundry for the mace. You're allowed to create the aroin, the tomb, Menasrin, Haminusarin, excuse me, Be'erev Yantiv. You're allowed to create the aroin only from, the coffin can only be made from wood that was prepared before Yantif. You're allowed to even gather wood bitzina in privacy for the creation of the coffin on Chol Hamoed. And now we have another Mishnah. Says the Mishnah on Chasam and Beis, you're not allowed to get married on Chol Hamoed. What type of marriage? It's the first time this woman that was married can't do Yiba. Why? Which Gemara is going to deal with. Why can't you be happy? Stay tuned for one moment. Avol, what are you allowed to do? Machzes Gushasi, allowed to remarry your divorcee, as Rashi says, it's not that much joy. And a woman is allowed to put on a makeup and make her adornment, which we'll see in the Gemara what that means. Rav Yehuda says Rav Yehuda she's not allowed to do this type of way of removing hair from her body, putting lime on her skin. Why? Because it makes her disgusting. A hedyot, an unskilled person, is tayfer kedarka, is allowed to sew. What is an uman allowed to do? Machlif. He's allowed to use irregular stitches. You're allowed to lace the beds. You're allowed to tie in it. At the end of the Mishnah, the second half of the Mishnah, I should say, all these different actions of sewing and irregular stitches and the beds we're going to get to in the Gemara eventually. But to start off and actually to conclude for today, what is this din? Why are you not allowed to get married in a Chol Hamoed? Ask the Gemara. You said you can't get married in a Chol Hamoed because it brings you joy. So what? Great, it's Yantif. Bring you joy. What's the problem? Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, you know what the problem is? Amar Rav Elazar, Amar Rav Yeshaya, V'amri Amar Rav Elazar, Amar Chanina, V'she'ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha. You're not allowed to mix joys. You have a din of joy of simcha when you get married. It's din of simcha when on Chol Hamoed. Two of them cannot mix. A second reason, Rabbi Ravuna Amnei Shaviniach Simcha Saregel Fa'isek b'simcha Zishtoi. We're nervous. You're going to forget about Yantif. You're going to be so busy with your wife. That's the reason why you're not allowed to do it. Amalei Abayah the Rav Yosef Had the Rabbi Ravuna. That's Rabbi Ravuna just said that we're nervous. You're not going to give Yantif the proper honor. The Ravu is really Rav. Amar Rav Daniel Katina Marav, Menayin She Nois and Nashim Moed, why not to get married in Chol Hamoed? Shenemer v'samachta b'chagecha. We darshin b'chagecha. You have to be misameach with the yontif and not with your wife. And the final reason of today, cause of the bother. It's a lot of bother getting ready for a wedding to prepare the meal. That's what you're not allowed to do in a Chol Hamoed. And actually, one more. You know why? Because the people know. And look at this. We'll actually conclude with this Rashi, a very fascinating Rashi. Says Rashi at the end of the Amid. Because if we allow you to get married on yontif, you know what's going to happen. People are not going to get married the whole year. Why not? They're going to wait for Chol Hamoed, because then you get two for the price of one. Because then, you know what happens? You get a Yontif meal, and you get a Chol Hamoed meal and a wedding meal. Why have to waste the meals? We all know back in the times, back in Europe, probably Yashin, for example, he got married on a Friday night. Many of the Gedalim used to get married. I think Rabbi as well got married on a Friday. Why? Because they couldn't afford a Suda, so the Shabbos Suda was their wedding Suda. That's okay. But over here, says the Gemara, we're concerned that if we allow you to get married on Chol Hamoed, the final territory of Yitzchak Nafcha is, you're not going to get married the whole year, and you're going to wait till Chol Hamoed. That's why we don't allow it. 4 different reasons why we're not allowed to get married on Chol Hamoed. We'll pick up from here in the next year, and Mirza Hashem.